WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah-sounding community radio with global soul. Hello, dear Drumfolk, and welcome to our Revolution ceremonies. This is Dr. David Pleasant with Way Savannah Initiative Radio. Our mission, you ask? To complicate, challenge, syncopate, dismantle, contrast, dissect, and break regularly adjusted narratives, and to suggest and demonstrate that accepted or expected neutrality reproduces unequal power flows. To provide multiple long-range alternatives which have been well-researched, relatable, and useful knowledge benefits ordinarily excluded from adjusted power flows. To assert consistent, serialized, and unapologetic countervailing narratives as normal practice, to indeed polyriddim, to be creatively maladjusted, to participate in the spirit of Yaupan and Buna, the native and African indigenous customs of powerful discourse and dialogue, accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee and social therapy. It is in this questioning spirit and thought world that we will discover why Juneteenth is not the same as Stono commemoration, why the 4th of July can never be like a 5th of July remembrance, why 1619 pales in regard to the 1526 insurrection, and why generally freedom is the heart to make revolution. Kanapaha theme of the month, Less Than Human, Part 2. The Kanapaha. Less Than Human, Part 2. Peaceful, silent violence, times and spaces, the less than human places. A key figure in the perceptual ranking of human beings in nature and early pre-modern concepts of civilization was Johann Joachim Winckelmann. With Winckelmann, art became a retrenched encampment of Neoplatonic assumptions of the good and virtuous as generated at the Vatican during the mid-1700s. It was reified as a prime site for the meticulous refining of difference itself as a pejorative valence, that is, a signifier of what was good, preferred to ugly, worthy, or abject. Johann Joachim Winckelmann, born in Dresden 1717, died in 1768. In Rome in 1755, he joined a team of Vatican Library scholars and began his meticulous study of Greek sculpture. Though his first book was an evaluation of Greek painting and sculpture, Winckelmann's discoveries and analysis created a great upsurge among the European middle class, which led to the development of new collections, galleries, libraries, and institutes, all devoted to classical Greek and Roman ideals. It also helped bolster emerging race science that reinforced already pernicious caste and rank profiles that undergirded things like slavery, chattel slavery, indentured servitude, criminalization, and rampant human vivisection. The standards he ostensibly framed in notions of perfections comparatively juxtaposed against Chinese, Moors, Negroes, Jews, and their associated types. For Winckelmann, God was perfection, and man, particularly white men, were in that image as various descending categories. Winckelmann's presence at the Vatican cemented a shift in the vision of art and the museum space, a public time space of which Greek sculpture, like Greek text, would also be an eminent cultural force. He worked as a great undercurrent for Nazis, Confederate segregationists, and American jurisprudence with his writings and his visions about what was the best type of human, what were the hierarchies of humanity through aesthetics and art. These classically beautiful symmetries for the sculpted human body, types of human beings, and constructs of civilization itself transmitted a deadly impact on indigenous people whose ways, customs, looks, and practices otherwise allowed for an organic symmetry and interplay of human agency and eco-cultural fluctuation. Directives of ideal beauty, logic, symmetry, and syntax contrastively orchestrated a forced perspective and pathway in which to see, understand, codify, and act upon things or beings which might not fit in. Indigenous people, particularly Native and African people in the New World, were assigned all of the zero-sum qualities of beauty, honor, logic, sense-making, refinement, entitlement, etc., commonly attributed to their presumed betters. This is to fully understand that the architectures of cities such as Savannah, Charleston, Wehrmacht, Berlin, Richmond and others in the antebellum and war times were built both to sustain and convey a presence of control, authority, and supremacy. They were constructions in peacetime. They exude the art and industry outlooks which harmonize with the racist catalogs designed by Winckelmann and many others of the Enlightenment caste. Presently, they prosper with travel and leisure, amusements, attractions, and delight as inviolable entitlements. In this view, peace, art, and beauty may operate together as a long-range weapon with long-range effects and sustainable returns. A long murder conducted through history, policy, planning, leisure, art, recreation, and outlook. History in this consideration is selectively applied to prop up adjusted beliefs. W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1935, if we are going to use history for our own pleasure and amusement, for inflating our national ego and giving us a false sense of accomplishments, then we must give up the idea of history as science or an art using the results of science and admit frankly that we are using a version of historic fact only in order to influence and educate a new generation along the way we wish. It is propaganda like this which had led men of the past to insist that history is only lies agreed upon. With Du Bois' statement in mind, the constructs sustained through language, policy, education, practice, and custom, as well, transmit an active posture of militant violence upon targeted communities, yet under guise of normality and peace. The violence is an extension of ordinary war through the terms of a denoted peace, a peacetime, or same-side construction. Same-side camaraderie, a peacetime collateral damage sustained by a one-sided friendly fire is war nonetheless. A peaceful war by another renaming. It's not a mishap, but a lifelong kill. The recurring injury, disease, marginalization, incarceration, and death is considered a normal and accepted and expected condition for the other. The peace is war, as the regularly accepted contrivances in perception enable telegraphic control and coercion as inviolable straight lines of reason and sense-making. It is what is supposed to happen for them, and it harmonizes with what is regularly seen and tolerated for them. The cities are built upon and maintained in an order, hierarchy, and perspective or prescriptive command. The connotative force of daily organization moves things only in one direction. The architectures remain both a landscape and horizon of the same at the same time. While the Nazi Einsatzgruppen crudely applied military weapons and force, the American Einsatzgruppen attacked through settled-in languages, connotations, and expectations of otherness through customary apartheid, customary practice, lesser humanness, a personhood merely soaked in as an established and selectively neutral point of view upon the outsider body, like Jim Crow. That adjusted architecture, adjusted history, or adjusted language can only be broken when the other declares a force, a presence, and entitlement within a full range of self-asserted and self-determined liberty, no matter if happy, sad, rich, poor, mad, or glad. It is in such a genuine declaration of liberty in which a flourishing of self-determined insight might guide true diversity beyond the congealed calculations of fixed Winckelmann-like assumptions. History is lies agreed upon and within the descending order of relevance, importance, entitlement, and humanness. A major component of the American project, as it touted freedom, equality, and individuality as guaranteed Enlightenment ideals, was to deny Africans and Native people all of the above. The ghettos of Nazi Germany, as well as the ghettos, hoods, or slums of America, or the reservations, were and are manufactured to reduce all the occupants' perceptions to survival mode impulses, stimulus and response. Any thought, ideal, inclination, or action would then be taken only in terms of immediate crises, and the crises are always conveniently engineered by ruling authority. Any open fascists, corrupt officials, or neo-colonial minions will do. They'll suffice to create turmoil and crises. Any focus on tactics or concepts related to genuine autonomy, sovereignty or freedom were and are either discouraged or overruled by the most basic and pressing survival obstacles thrown into the sightlines of oppressed people. Escape, rebellion, and freedom from either the colonial antebellum and any other totalitarian project would then be framed as unnecessary abstractions outside of relevant modes of survival. Thinking or reasoning itself could then be posed as superfluous action rather than a delineating feature of a genuinely free, equal, entitled, or self-determined humanity. However, to think, analyze, and critique are improvisatory acts of revolution and dissent. High intellectual ideals. Malcolm X, 1964, said of this kind of agency to self-direct and organize and analyze. Malcolm said, the importance of these meetings is not so much to spell out any program. You can't give a people a program until they realize they need one, and until they realize that all existing programs aren't programs that are going to produce productive results. So what we like to do is to go into our problem and just analyze and analyze and analyze and question things that you don't understand, so we can at least try to get a better picture of what faces us. Of those who resist such focus, Malcolm went on to say, this is their role. They're just here to try and restrain you and me, to restrain the struggle, to keep it in a certain groove and not let it out of control. Unquote. In short, to voluntarily give up one's power, or to go into our problem and just analyze and question things that you don't understand, would be to give up an entitled human rights and humanists which have the potential to free us. Malcolm was right. You have to go in and educate yourself, analyze, look at stuff closely, intently, not just be predisposed to what's right before your eyes. Those rights and entitlements spoken of by Malcolm actually distinguish us from impulse-directed things in some totalitarian behaviorist project like Hitlerian supremacy or consumer form branding or antebellum rule, Confederacy, chattel slavery, plantation mentality. In the glaring absence of established, balanced, serialized, and highly promoted countervailing narrative, new prestige architecture, a totalitarian behaviorist project might submit a distance, a complementary distance and segregation no different than that of the past. In fact, the same things can exist right in the present, right before our eyes as consumer modalities, ways of doing things, seeing things, buying things that keep us in order and line flow. The slave shack always stays over there. It's merely renamed and reclassified. A place is made for heritage, history, and people in side narratives, presumably equal, but obviously separated from challenging contextualization of historical content and present redistributions of power. Diversity, inclusion, and so-called complexity just go right along with the slave shack as a neutralized site, just another historic data point. A new order of separate and unequal, now calculated as everyone has a story. While the contributions of skilled, knowledgeable, or savvy slaves add to the wealth and power of the plantation, the story of masters, colonial, Confederate, antebellum, and Jim Crow, wealthy oligarchs, and corporate controllers always lead the way, sustained with the profits made by the intellectual property of those very same enslaved people, thought to be grateful slaves, always subjugated and disempowered. The contribution narratives, like from native or African ingenuity, used now as functional technological or labor interests used by plantations, now is a reason for pride and celebration, some think, when in fact they represent the co-optation and abuse of indigenous knowledge for industry. The power brokers and profiteers of that industry still retain the same power yesterday and today. The celebrations, however, continue, though much of that knowledge comes from sacred dimensions of eco-cultural practice from indigenous people, African and native, such as water and food are sacred. Those are indeed sacred dimensions and not just use categories for industry, commerce, and enterprise, like some kind of fodder or strip mine. The spiritual and psychological dimensions of having fun in a splendid time, enjoyment and entertainment, and distressed locales of sustained fatigue from people who have been abused by these systems may require more investigation that can happen in this short piece. The fact is, however, that the balm of thrill, gratification, entertainment, or enjoyment may be questionable options for engagement of omitted, real, genuine historical material and heritage kept from readily available foreground archival representation or contextualization. Stuff that's present before us. Serialized, escape, rebellion, and freedom, liberation, architectures, and narratives. And architecture does nonetheless confer the orientation of participants in a selectively higher to lower power totem, just like the plantation mansion, Vermark institution, overseer house, and slave shack quarters, just like Winckelmann set up through his ideals of the human body and painting and sculpture delineated through these neoclassical ideals. They live on in the same Confederate architectures. The tenets of colonial, Confederate, antebellum, and Jim Crow custom resonate backwards and forward in time. The less than human assignment constructed upon the bodies of others carries a taint which defies reason, morality, justice, and balance. And just in 1946, African-American veterans came home with a victory at home, victory at war consequence of their beliefs and actions, a savage condition of a fascist Einsatzgruppen in America. At home, little different than that, they had just faced with the Nazis and other Axis powers in World War II, glared right at them. In the hearing on the beating till blind treatment of a black World War II veteran from South Carolina, 1946, the following scene emerged. Quote, after a brief investigation, Shull and other officers were tried in Columbia, South Carolina, and found not guilty by an all-white jury. During the trial, Shull's defense attorneys argued that Woodard, the black veteran, belonged to an inferior race and told the jury that convicting Shull would be tantamount to telling the public officers of South Carolina that you no longer want your home, your wife, and your child protected. After the not guilty verdict was delivered, the courtroom cheered. That's America, 1946. A consistent and unrepentant countervailing narrative may only supply balance to the spurious presumptions and articulations of supremacist culture and custom. Those things carried through Jim Crow, segregation, chattel slavery, Weimar Republic, Einsatzgruppen, and all those things that exist even today that carry on the same concepts and power of
Bike Walk Savannah offers bicycle education programs for children and adults, including bicycle rodeos. Nationally certified instructors ensure that all education programs are safe, informative, and enjoyable for participants. They also offer customized programs for businesses and other organizations that are seeking to make bicycling and walking part of their employees' wellness programs. More information is available at bikewalksavannah.org.
The Live Oak Public Library System offers local residents access to hundreds of thousands of movies, television programs, albums, audiobooks, ebooks, and digital comic books for free on your streaming television and mobile devices through the Hoopla app. Supported devices include Roku, Fire, Apple TV, iPhone, and Android, among others. The selection is vast. All you'll need is your library card. Find the Hoopla app on your device and more information at liveoakpl.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
Part of today's broadcast comes to you from the backwoods of Mississippi, just a few miles from where civil rights warriors Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were murdered in the early 1960s. I'm here as a part of my monologue book, that I'm completing this year. The book follows my cross-country motorcycle journeys into the places and spaces of liberation for America's indigenous, African, and Native communities. It offers a no-holds-barred treatment of the asserted escape, rebellion, and freedom power of people set upon their full entitlement as sovereign human beings. The writing offers a frontal, countervailing narrative against ordinary victim stories, grateful freed slave narratives, or adjusted plantation contribution side stories. You know, the stories often told as complex histories, but the ones that actually sustain an avoidance of troublesome insurrection and rebellion historiography. This monologue book, by contrast, sets out to unveil as many troublesome insurrection and rebellion narratives as possible. The monologue. And in this month's Yaupin and Buna segment, we have again my guest, scholar Raja Haman, Afro-German scholar. And remember, the Yaupin and Buna segment is about the Native American drink, Yaupin, which is used in ceremony for medicinal purposes, societal ones, spiritual ones, and ways to pull the community together, specifically with Osceola, the great orator and Native American revolutionary and insurrectionist. As well, we have the Buna, the concept of using these drinks from either Africa or Native American culture. And we have Buna from the Oromo people of Ethiopia, a drink that was done in tribute in honor of Mother Nature herself. And it was also drawn from the idea of a bowl, tona, and barak, 3 phases of drinking that brought the people involved into a certain sort of a spirited community dialogue, one that was meant for power and edification of the community, a building, a spiritual outlet where people would speak their mind, be honest and true, but things all related to developing a sense of community that would grow and have people be educated.
My name is Raja Leon Haman. I'm an Afro-German PhD student in cultural and social anthropology, doing research on matters revolving around social justice, racism, and identity politics. David invited me to share some of my thoughts on how a comparative discussion of the Holocaust and the history of racial oppression in the U.S. may enrich our discourses on inhumanity and injustice. I believe that it is always valuable to learn from another society's efforts to critically engage with its past and face the atrocities that were committed in its name. There is something that the U.S. can learn from how Germany has made extensive discussions of the Holocaust an integral part of its educational system, and from how taking responsibility for the crimes committed by the Nazi regime has in fact become central to German identity. Germany, in turn, however, struggles greatly with finding an appropriate language to think and speak about its endemic racism against people of color. In this regard, it has much to learn from liberation struggles in the U.S., which have both practically and theoretically wrestled with the causes, forms, and effects of racism for centuries. Also, national identity in the U.S. rests on a more pluralistic and multicultural understanding than is the case in Germany, where the concept of Afro-Germans, for example, is still foreign to many. The other reason why I believe that we would benefit greatly from engaging with the differences as well as similarities between the Holocaust and racial oppression in the U.S. is that it allows us to see the connections and continuities between these histories of inhumanity. There is a great danger in the belief that the Holocaust, colonialism, enslavement, and ensuing racial oppression in the U.S., or apartheid in South Africa, were just isolated historical incidents, especially if they are only seen as unfortunate deviations from the otherwise linear path of the Western project of modernity towards ever greater liberty and equality. What we refer to as modernity fundamentally rests upon a long history of marginalization, exploitation, and destruction of people that were considered less than human. The history of enlightenment, which is seen as crucial for the development of modern societies, cannot be separated from colonialism and enslavement. Some of the exact same philosophers who proclaimed that all humans were equal supported, if not even developed, racist and sexist ideologies that excluded the majority of the global population from having any rights to that very equality. The failure to analyze this history of injustice leads to theories and ultimately policies that ignore the structural inequalities that govern society and are hence wholly inadequate to provide us with any real solutions. We can find the continuities of colonialism and a fascist and otherwise supremacist ideology in all spheres of society, domestically, in the carceral system, healthcare, education, infrastructure, etc., and globally, for example, in the disproportionate effects of climate change upon the global south, or the still massively imbalanced political and economic relations between Western nations and their former colonies. A comparative perspective at different histories of inhumanity and injustice, particularly at the Holocaust and racial oppression in the U.S., allows us to better see these connections and continuities. And that is of such importance because in order to change social reality, we first have to understand it for what it is. Only then will we be able to develop transformative visions for the future.
And today we have in the Echo Cultural Corner, again, Miss Sadie Pleasant of Savannah, 90 years old, lived through a lot of Savannah history and culture in the coastal regions from Sapelo Island, Darien, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and up some of the coast of South Carolina even. A lot to say about some of the things that went on here that are part of the cultural history here, but are part of the larger ecological culture, the eco-culture, coming out of concepts of indigenous thought and platforming of things from our environment as things that edify us and help us grow and sustain us.
James Hazel's wife, Nancy Hazel, we called her Doggy. James Hazel, my uncle, and Nancy, my aunt. Also, the only midwife of that era was James Hazel's mother. They called her Cookie. She delivered most of the children born in West Savannah. My uncle James Hazel worked for the railroad. When they came to Savannah, he had a little shop on the corner of Farrell and Love Street. Finally, he closed his shop. Later on, his son, Thomas Hazel, opened up the shop and turned it into a place for young black men to come and box on the corner of Love and Farrell. It was the only place that black men could learn to box. There's a picture of James Hazel in the book book about Bellwood, telling that he worked on the railroad, and the young lady by him is his daughter. That is incorrect. That is not his daughter. He did not have his granddaughter. He did not have any grandchildren. The lot where the house stood and the boxing shop has been torn down, but the lot is still there. I feel that there should be some type of plaque on that lot indicating that it was set up for a young black male to learn how to box. It was set up by Thomas Hazel, the son of James and Nancy Hazel.
A part of today's broadcast comes to you from the backwoods of Mississippi, just a few miles from where civil rights warriors Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were murdered in the early 1960s. I'm here as part of a motorlog book I'm completing this year. The book follows my cross-country motorcycle journeys into the places and spaces of liberation for America's indigenous African and Native communities, the domains of liberation warriors. It offers a no-holds-barred treatment of the asserted, escape, rebellion, and freedom power of a people set upon their full entitlement as sovereign human beings. The writing offers a frontal, countervailing narrative against the ordinary victim stories, grateful freed slave narratives, or adjusted plantation contribution side stories. The stories so often sold as, quote, a complex history, unquote. You know, the ones that actually sustain an avoidance of troublesome insurrection and rebellion historiography. This monologue, in contrast, sets out to unveil as many troublesome insurrection and rebellion narratives as possible. Escape, rebellion, and freedom. And that's it for this month's Kanapaha, Way Savannah, WWS Radio, Escape, Rebellion, and Freedom. There we go. See you next time. And remember, freedom is the heart to make revolution.
But there's a method to this madness, a scientific feature, future sadness, a way to steal the gold, take the bones of the young and old, anything can be sold. Like ships, loaded with cargo, such our lives ready with far to go, yet we are casting the play like slaves, afraid to catch a freedom train. And who finally sits at the top, checking the clock, where the buck stops and drops in the pocket, he who exploits our race. Every day, the further down we go, the higher we climb. The further up we go, the higher we climb. Fell by slave ship history, manifest destiny.